are live. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks.
I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. You're the co-founder of Now or Never Ventures. You actually worked at ATB as well. But before we get to all of that, perhaps give us a little background who you are and what you're currently up to.
For sure. So I am a born and raised Calgarian, one of the few. I've had my whole life in Calgary, spent a little bit of time working elsewhere, but went to school in Calgary at the University of Calgary, and actually studied entrepreneurship, was what I majored in. But I think I was the only person out of university in that major that actually got a job. So I went into management consulting instead of entrepreneurship. But always kind of was passionate about what entrepreneurship was, and especially around technology and all of that. So started my career in consulting and got kind of like the experience under my belt being in a big four type firm and traveling the world and doing a bunch of that sort of stuff. And then after a few years decided I was kind of tired with that grind and wanted to come back home and spend more time in Calgary. So joined ATB and have kind of had a really great career there, kind of doing corporate entrepreneurship, which I'd say is probably more what I'm passionate about, is how do you kind of get big organizations to start to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and try to build ventures and do really innovative things. But after kind of 4.5 years at ATB, I decided to jump out and do my own thing. So now I'm in an entrepreneurial venture consulting firm where I'm trying to help corporations be entrepreneurial and do entrepreneurship. So it's kind of like right in the middle between everything I'm passionate about. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Alex. Whenever I talk to other entrepreneurs, I'm always curious. Growing up as a kid, were you always into entrepreneurship? Were you selling lemonade on lemonade stands? Like, what was your background like?
Yes, it was definitely, yeah, it was funny. My mom always talks about kind of a funny story when I was younger, and there's a lot of kids on the street, and there was some construction workers across the street doing renovations and building some homes. And so a bunch of the kids were doing lemonade stands. And so then I was like, well, you know, these guys that are in these construction sites, they all have kids. So I started making those like really silly beaded geckos. I'm not sure if you ever did those at camp.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I made all these like beaded geckos, and that's what I decided to sell to all the construction workers instead of lemonade. And so I tried to come up with a different product and charged a lot more for them. I think I charged like $5 per gecko, and was selling those on the street. So did that, and yeah, I was always just kind of trying to figure out new business opportunities and was super passionate about it. And had lots of kind of smaller things that I would try when I was younger. The whole way through, and both my parents had a bit of entrepreneurial kind of inklings before too. They owned a jewelry store when I was younger, even though they were an engineer and a geologist. So they always kind of had these side hustles and these businesses they were doing. So I think I just inherited that.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, the reason I ask is because we have a lot of entrepreneurs, even aspiring entrepreneurs listening. One of the biggest, scariest steps is moving from that 9-to-5 secure job to your own venture. But for you, Alex, how is that transition like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say it was super easy, but I think it is scary. There's a book I love, Messy Middle, by one of the product gurus of the world, and there's a chapter in there, and he says the two most addictive things in the world are heroin and a biweekly paycheck. And I read that right when I was about to jump. And it's super true because you get really comfortable. You're making really good money. You've got, pensions, and you're getting tax benefits, and your cell phone's paid for. You got all these things, and the idea of jumping is really scary because when you start to add it all up, like it's not a cheap thing. And one of the things, like I've talked about a little bit with some of my friends too, is that I really think entrepreneurship is a little bit of a privilege. Like, I think people either get into it because they have to and they don't have other options, or because they can. And that was really probably reflective of my decision to jump in when I did. Is 5 years ago or 7 years ago, I don't think I would have been able to. I didn't have the financial security or the network or the connections to really do it right. But at this point in my life, I'm able to take that risk. I'm able to jump in, and I'm able to look at it as more of an investment, to say, this is almost like, what's my risk tolerance on me taking this opportunity cost to jump into this business? And do I think I'll do better than I could do in the stock market with that opportunity cost? So I've probably looked at it a little bit more rationally. And it's not an easy decision. It's super scary. But in the end, you kind of just have to jump and just do it. And it's kind of that momentum just to say, like, all right, I'm going to peel off the Band-Aid and just go. Because I've got everything in place to do that. And if it fails, it fails. Hopefully it doesn't, and you're going to work hard to make sure it doesn't, but it's still super scary, and you kind of have to go in eyes wide open on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually read your current role now. I read that you're helping companies build audacious products and services. But yeah, from your words, I guess, what's your favorite part of being, I guess, your own boss?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's because I worked a lot in big corporates. So like that was kind of my background. HV was like small at 5,000 people. And then when I worked at Accenture in consulting, I think we had 140,000 employees around the world. Like it was a big company. So I came from those types of organizations. And I think one of the things that I'm really enjoying is just the ability to go fast. And that's one of the things I see with a lot of my clients now, because I am helping these bigger companies. But the ability that you don't have to really ask anyone for permission to do something. And if you think there's something that you should be doing or running after, you can go after it, and you can kind of write your own kind of path, and you don't have to have it all figured out either. You can kind of say, well, this isn't really aligned to strategy, but that's okay because I don't have a board or an investor that's telling me, why are you doing this thing? And are you crazy? We can kind of pursue these really crazy ideas and crazy clients or interesting clients, because if it doesn't fit, or if we need to discount our fees, or if we need to do something to make something cool happen, we can. So that's probably the part I'm enjoying the most, is just that kind of freedom and autonomy to take bigger risks without having to really do all the politics associated with trying to do them.
No, I hear you. What would you say is some of the aspects that kind of got you off guard when you first started your own venture? Because I know when I first started, you obviously have an idea, have all this passion and fire to go work through your idea, but you don't realize the taxes, maybe some bookkeeping, and all this other components. But what were maybe some of the first initial challenges for you?
Yeah, the hardest one was I quit ATB in February, and COVID hit in March. So, and my business partner, he had left a couple months earlier from his job. So we kind of, in February, March was like when we were going in earnest at trying to build the business. And all of a sudden I could start saying what I was doing and start promoting it. And then COVID hit, and we had a whole bunch of statements of work that were out. And so we're feeling all good. We're like, oh my God, we're getting traction early. This is awesome. Everything's lining up, and then everybody canceled everything because they went into that, we have to wait and see, and we have no idea what the budgets are going to be, and global pandemic. And so that was probably the scariest, because I'm like, well, and to the point of jumping in, if I waited 5 months, I could have got paid and been having a stable job, and now I'm in a pandemic starting a business. Like, this is terrifying. So that was a little scary. And then we've had to solve a lot of things coming with that. Like a lot of our business development was done in person, a lot of in-person networking. We were hosting these supper clubs where we bring a whole bunch of like innovation, like-minded people together to talk. And it's not salesy. We don't let consultants get up and talk. It's always like somebody that's done innovation in a company talking. And we had this like great kind of community and network and people that we would go meet with. And then all of a sudden it all stopped, and we had to do it all digitally. And so trying to figure out, how do you meet people? How do you connect with people? How do you still have those like really fun conversations? Because usually we were having them after like 4 beers on a Tuesday night. And now you've got like a Zoom call for like an hour, and it's like time locked. And so how do you get those same sorts of passion and energy and conversations and the BD going digitally? And so that was probably the hardest part for us. And then, we definitely had all the like small things like tax and trying to figure all that out, which is complicated. Business banking isn't very good. So And as a past banker, it's one of my frustrating areas because you're just like, why is this not better? It needs to be better. Can't even pay ourselves. We can't even access our own money, which is just frustrating. But yeah, so we had a lot of those sorts of learnings. But I would say just moving digitally has been the hardest and trying to figure out how to do that really effectively.
Absolutely. One of the things you actually mentioned that really caught my attention is leaning on your network and surrounding yourself with good people. So for the people listening that maybe want to build their network or even expand their network, what sorts of advice or tips would you give them to really get those mentors or people you can rely on?
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting one because I think, you know, you read a lot, like I've gone down Google a lot. I'm like, okay, how do you do BD? And like, let's like, you know, supercharge this. And to be fair, like we haven't really had a lot of success with like cold emails or any of that. So one of the things that we do is just kind of find interesting people that we're connected with or people that are doing interesting work and just try to chat with them about it. Or we ask for referrals from our network. And that seems to work the best, is to say, you know, here's what we're up to. Here's, you know, our branding's changed a lot even in 6 months. So it's a lot better now than it was. But here's our intro deck. Here's who we are. Here's what we're up to. Check us out. And if you know anybody that you think would be a good fit for us, let us know. And that's where we've gotten most of our kind of growth and network and connections, is through that sort of stuff. It hasn't been just us sitting behind a computer emailing random people. You know, it's really got that personal connection tied to it, or that kind of warm lead. And so that's been the biggest thing, is like leveraging your existing network to grow a bigger network and not trying to just do it by yourself. And I always kind of avoid the big networking events. I avoided them before COVID, where, you know, it's a big ballroom and everyone's kind of walking around handing out cards and be like, hi, what do you do? Hi, what do you do?
Yeah.
Because it never really did anything. But you're taught like that's what you're supposed to do, is like go out there and be strong and don't be scared. But I think it's a lot more around, you know, referrals. Like that's just where I've found the most success, as opposed to some of the other options.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to echo that too. But I think if you do go cold, if you will, always leading with value works. Always be interested, and not, you don't have to necessarily be interesting. But yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah. It's hard to talk about yourself though. Like I struggle with that. And I think it's really easy to sell a product, and I'm selling a service now. And so it's a little bit harder because like you're really selling yourself, and that becomes uncomfortable with a cold email, because you're like, you don't want to be like, oh, well, I'm awesome.
Yeah, don't be too salesy.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm the same way.
But my business partner, he says a lot of controversial things on LinkedIn. And so if somebody posts something, a corporation, and he doesnbut he will tell them. So there's mornings I wake up on LinkedIn and I'm like, oh my gosh, he just said that. Like, but we actually get a lot of people that are like, hey, like I saw that you said this. Thank you for being brave. I want to know you. So I think there is some of that value, or at least kind of standing out and not being scared, and in a world of vanilla and safe, and you know, what you're supposed to be or how a professional is supposed to act. How do you kind of have that opinion and that voice? And he does that a lot better than I do, but he's great at that. And we get a lot of also, you know, that's where we get most of our cold people, but they're kind of seeing something that we're doing and saying like, that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, just being authentic. Would you say, I guess, what would you say your unique skill is? What your superpower, Alex's superpower is?
It's a good question. I would say, like, especially in the context of like why my business partner and I did this, and what we believe is that we really do want to create, we kind of have this whole set of things that we think should exist. And a lot of companies are really scared to go challenge the things that are almost kind of set beliefs within their industry. So like, it's always been done this way, or there's no other way to rethink this, or they're not curious. And so I would say one of the biggest things that we do is we just go explore, and we ask a lot of questions, and we make a lot of interesting connections. And so I would say like curiosity probably is the biggest one, because we're just always learning, reading, exploring, asking, talking to customers. And then we're able to bring all those kind of data points together to say, here's a brand new opportunity that you probably didn't think about based on, either the capabilities of the company and this unmet customer need or this trend that we've noticed. So that's what I think we do really well, is just being really curious. And we also don't go in and say, hey, big business, here's the 3 things you should be doing, because we think so. We try to figure out a little bit more about like, why are you doing things a certain way, and try to have that curiosity first. I've hired a lot of consultants in my past life, and they'll always come in and say like, this is what you should do, which is like, yeah, duh, I would do that if I could. But having that more curiosity to find those areas that maybe I hadn't thought of, was what I valued from consultants, and that's what we're trying to bring in, is that real curiosity, and kind of more innovative thinking that way.
Absolutely. Speaking of curiosity, I'm curious. What's Alex curious about right now? What's on your mind? It could be personally, professionally. It could be a new Netflix show. What's Alex curious about?
Yeah. Well, my family, much to their dismay, I've been very much deep into the U.S. politics. I'm a dual citizen, so going to bed with the presidential debates on, and kind of being really digging into a bunch of that sort of stuff. Just personally, I'm very interested in it, and I'm interested about how those big decisions are going to translate into the future of economies, and how society will even change as a result of a lot of this stuff. So very curious about that. More from a business context, one of the areas we're really interested in, the areas where there's almost taboos that exist, where people don't want to talk about things or touch certain topics. And so we've really been diving into retirement, aging, and death, with a lot of our clients, because with just changing demographics and the way customers are kind of acting these days, you kind of have to address those things. And the way that they've been done to date is very outdated. And it's very negative. Like, people don't want to touch funerals. They don't want to touch that industry. And so we're very curious, like whether it's a life insurance client or a bank or even a farming client or other clients, like what does that whole taboo mean, and how does it actually influence and change business, and what are the opportunities that sit there, because everyone's a little bit too uncomfortable to go explore it. So we've been diving into a lot of that sort of stuff these days.
Oh, wow. Another, I guess, from my perspective at least, something I'm curious about is what's the business landscape going to look like post-pandemic? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you're seeing lots of big companies moving straight to remote work, working from home. But that also comes up with some challenges as well. Have you seen anything from your perspective, Alex? Working from home, work-life balance, like how's that for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, talking to clients too, there's kind of this mixed view. Some people, I mean, I think it depends on kind of life stage. Some people are so eager to get back into the office, and I admit, like, doing collaboration and brainstorming and having those like kind of big conversations, it is hard to do digitally. So I miss parts of it. But at the same time, like I would say, and I think a lot of people have provided a lot of perspective on what do you actually want to be doing. And I noticed even pre-entrepreneurship, it was scary, the idea of going into entrepreneurship because of how much it costs to live. But all of a sudden now I'm like, well, I don't have to be, paying for drinks and dinner for BD every night. And I had a lot of convenience costs because I was running around so much, had so many meetings, and was so busy. So I was like paying money for, Freshie every day, and like dry cleaning and Uber Eats and, Ubers everywhere. And all of that went away. And so I think I realized, it's not so much even about the top line, it's more about your kind of net. And how do you kind of rethink and I think people are thinking about that. Where do you rethink where you live? How do you think how you live? What choices are you going to make? What are you going to spend money on? Because you don't need to be I've put my entire work wardrobe like in a box because I don't even need to wear it anymore, and you don't need to buy more of it. So I think it's been really interesting to watch, and I think it's been a really good thing for me personally, which is hard to say. You don't want to say a pandemic's been good. But I think it's provided a lot of perspective, and it's kind of redefined what I want to do. And I think it has done that for a lot of people as well. And the one other thing I've noticed too with companies is there's a person I used to work with at ATB who is the chief people officer, Lauren Rubis. Awesome person. He's got a whole bunch of thoughts on culture. He believes everyone should work remotely. Workplace 2.0. He's been on the forefront of that for years. And he was advising a company, and he was trying to get everyone to work remotely. And they were like, oh, this could be a 2-year change journey. It's like so hard. And then in 2 weeks, everyone was doing it. And so I think it taught companies that, it's not, you don't have to overcomplicate these big changes. And to make big changes in your business, you don't need to spend 2 years creating change agendas and bringing in a bunch of consultants and making roadmaps and plans and talking about it in tons of meetings. If you have to do it, you can just do it. And I think it's created kind of this new urgency or this new ability to change that we didn't have before because we overcomplicated it before.
Absolutely. One thing I did want to touch on with you about entrepreneurship is kind of the common myths about entrepreneurship. Because from my perspective, there's lots of glorifying of the winners and not enough kind of what the day-to-day looks like, as you know. Lots of challenges, lots of ups and downs. But yeah, from your perspective, Alex, what's maybe a common myth that you always come across about entrepreneurship that you wish would just be debunked?
I think that, everyone has an idea, and you talk to it's like the new cool thing. Like when I was in university, it was, you went into investment banking or consulting, and that was like, you're cool if you're going to do one of those two things. And now it's, you're going to join a startup or start a startup. And that's like the new cool career choice. And again, like consultants, when I was in consulting industry, they'd always say, I want to exit into VC or private equity and do buy side. And that's the goal. And now when I talk to younger consultants at firms, they all want to be a product lead or in startups or creating something. So it's definitely shifted in terms of the popularity. But I think, having an idea is really just not enough. And getting that real knowledge about how to do something is really critical. And I think people kind of jump in and they say, I'll learn this industry. How hard can it be? As opposed to going in and saying, I've got a whole network of people and I know the industry deeply, so I can challenge it and do it really well. And that's, I think, the difference. If I hadn't bought consulting work for the last 5 years, I don't think I'd be as good at doing consulting work now. And that's just because I get the cycles. I get the buyers, I get the competitors, I understand how it works. I understand what doesn't work. I understand all of that. And I've got tons of people to rely on to help me round it out. And so I think people just think it's about having a good idea and dreaming. And that next step to actually doing it, executing it, and de-risking it is the hard part. And not enough people talk about the de-risking of a venture. They only talk about the potential of a venture. And if you're not going in eyes wide open about what could go wrong and how you're going to actively manage that, I think, and if you don't even know what you don't know, that's a very scary thing.
Absolutely. I love that de-risking. I know you've done lots of strategy work, but maybe what are some tactical things maybe that the listeners could take away from de-risking, maybe the idea that they have or venture they want to start?
I think a couple of things. So one, the numbers. One thing I notice is that, people will be like, well, I'm not an accountant, so I don't know the numbers. They'll make up an excuse. I'm like, whatever. You need to know the numbers. You need to know, there's somebody I knew a while back that wanted to start a sandwich shop. And just even going through that whole process about how many sandwiches do you actually have to sell a day, based on the hours you can be open, to actually pay your rent, let alone make any money. And what's actually your hurdle rate for break even plus the salary you actually want to make? How many sandwiches are we talking here? This is a lot of sandwiches. And if you only want to work 4 hours a day, you're not selling enough sandwiches to pay any of this. And, people just kind of manipulate the numbers a lot. So I think that's knowing the numbers deeply and knowing where all the money flows, I think is super critical. And you have to be a nerd on the numbers. You just have to know how to make the money, how to optimize it, how to extract that value and not be scared of it. If you don't know your numbers and you're an entrepreneur, I think that's terrifying. The second thing I think is just being open to that feedback. And it's another thing I think that a lot of people struggle with. And it's a muscle that you have to definitely grow, to be able to take an idea and go throw it in front of people and have people absolutely tear it apart and be okay with that. And I think a lot of people, they'll say, here's my venture idea. I'm going to do a survey. And then they go to a survey and the survey is like, do you want a blue car or a red car? And people are like, well, I guess based on the options, I'll take a blue car. But really, they don't want a car. So you're not learning whether or not your business is actually feasible. You're just trying to validate what you want to hear. And I think learning how to do really good customer research, I think learning how to have really good customer conversations so that you're not, perpetuating bias within your own business or your own belief system, but then also taking the business to people that are strong business leaders who've run these businesses before and have done that so that they can give you their roadmap and say, here's what you're missing. Here's why I don't think you should be doing this business at all, or why you shouldn't be successful. I think is really important. And people kind of just put their head in the sand because they don't want to know. It's almost like the ignorance is bliss thing. And I think you can't do that. You have to be really open and say, maybe this idea isn't good. And that's okay. And we do that with clients all the time. Like, we've got ventures that we're working on with them, and we'll have a great idea that's, perfect if you're in the industry and the company wants to sell it so bad, but customers just don't like it. And you can't push it through. Like, you could, but you're just going to lose a lot of money.
Right.
So like, what's the point? And so I think learning that customer research cycle and like learning how to actually take that feedback, actually own it. And if someone says your logo sucks, your logo sucks. Like, that's it. Like, just own it.
Yeah.
Don't be like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or like, I really like it.
Yeah, I like the colors. Or
Yeah, you can't. Like, you have to really, really be critical about your business and improving it all the time.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree with you there, Alex. What's something maybe that you're proud of that we haven't touched on in the interview so far?
It's a good question. I think so. My last project when I was at ATB was kind of trying to build a venture within a company, and that was probably one of the most challenging projects I've ever done. And I'm not sure I'd have either. I wouldn't check the box that's a failure, and I wouldn't check a box that was a success. I think it had some things that went really well, and it had some things that it definitely did not hit, and wasn't successful. And I learned a lot through that and developed a really interesting team from that. And so I think that's the one I'm most proud of. And a lot of my team from Brightside has now moved into other startups. They're working in other startups in Calgary, Cement, a lot of them went to Cement, but they're in Neo Financial and some others. And so it's really cool to see how, where we started a couple of years ago when we started this venture, like, none of us knew how to build a bank. None of us knew what we were doing. And then we did, and we built it and we learned a lot. And now all those learnings are kind of trickling and helping other companies start to get successful and helping the Calgary economy, because now you've got people that have this great story and this great experience. So I would say getting that through and being able to lead that and getting that off the ground was probably one of the things I'm proudest of. And now for me too, I'm able to do it a little bit quicker. So as everyone and their grandma wants to run or start a bank these days. So I'm having a lot of conversations with companies about it, but it's easy now to kind of say, like, here's what I've learned, and here's how we can actually make Canadian financial landscape a lot better. So that's been something I've been very proud of.
Absolutely. Speaking of landscapes, you mentioned the Calgary economy and how industries change. But from your perspective, Alex, how has Calgary changed from when you first started to now?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's a tough one. Like, I talk with a lot of people about this too in Calgary, and I think everyone's frustrated because there is like this kind of doom and gloom that's existing right now, and everyone's frustrated by the doom and gloom. But I think there's also kind of to the vein of being honest is to figure out where that's coming from and what's really the root cause on it, so that we can be critical and fix things. And it's really interesting. Like, when I first was in Calgary and doing my career, it was busy. People were ambitious. People had big goals, and there's money and appetite and risk taking that just existed. It was a lot different, and just movement, and a lot more young people. Young people were moving to Calgary to start their careers because they knew that they could make more money. They could learn more. They could learn faster. They'd have more autonomy. They'd have more growth opportunities. And I think the thing that scares me now is a lot of that is moving and leaving to other places. And if we're not kind of investing in the right areas right now for people to feel like they can actually leapfrog their experiences, like it's kind of the rocket ship thing. Are you on a rocket ship or not? Is Calgary a great place to live and work? Sure. Is it a rocket ship right now? I don't know. And could people go find a rocket ship somewhere else? And should they? Well, they should. So I think that's what worries me, and we've done these supper clubs, and this pre-COVID, but We did them in Toronto, we did them in Vancouver, we did them in Calgary. And it was really interesting to see how the conversation was different across the cities. And, you know, in Toronto, it was very much around, here's the innovative things we're doing, here's what we built, here's like a really tactical problem I'm having in being able to scale this innovation or to do more. And it was a very kind of problem solving focus, like, how do I do this thing? I'm doing stuff, let's go. Vancouver was kind of slow, it was a lot of service providers. But in Calgary, it was a lot about people saying we should, and nobody was actually doing yet. And I think that's what makes me nervous, is that we had a bias to action before with a lot of our companies. And now there seems to be this kind of like waiting on the sidelines, like government should be figuring this out for us. You know, if we build all these support systems and train people in innovation will happen. You know, there's just a lot of talk and a lot of suggestions and a lot of, you know, just dialogue and spinning about what we should do. But they're all, like, to the entrepreneurial example, they're all ideas. And that's not the hard part. The hard part is the execution of those things. And I'm not sure, I don't know if it's that we don't have the right people. I don't know if it's that we don't have enough companies that are doing stuff. I don't know what it is, but that's what really makes me nervous about Calgary's landscape, is that we don't have enough people doing. And even the clients I work with in Calgary are so much slower than the clients I work with in Toronto. So much slower.
Wow.
And they shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're smaller clients, and they're all in the same time zone, and there's no reason that they should be slower, and they are. And so it's like, how do we kind of create that speed again? And that worries me.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually mentioned a couple companies. I've had some of the co-founders on the podcast, Amend and Neo Financial. Yeah, I think we just need more executors and more companies like those and yours, and just more entrepreneurs doing in the community to really push that industry forward. My next question is a little change of gears. I'm just really nerdy about consumer behavior, but what's your consumer behavior been like during pandemic? Have you been streaming more Netflix, or video on demand, or eating out or eating in more, I guess, or how's that pandemic affected you?
Yeah, I luckily did not get the pandemic 15. I think I like lost weight.
15.
Yeah, no, we definitely spent more time outside, which I really liked. Like, I'm an outdoorsy person to start, and just the pandemic gifted us that ability to be outside more, because you should be. But yeah, I would say our behavior, like, we're spending so much less money, which isn't good for the economy at all, I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're like cooking from home more. We're, you know, learning more, I guess, is kind of like, you've got time to read. Because like, what else are you gonna do? And yeah, that's been really interesting. And working out so much, like, we bought a Peloton. We were lucky. We like saw the pandemic coming, and we bought it as we got it like in March.
Oh wow!
And then the wait list of like 2 months showed up, and we got the Peloton early. But yeah, so it's been really interesting, just starting to become a lot more digital. Like, a lot of, like, I was already pretty digital. I'm more of that early adopter, new gadgets, sweet, I'm going to try it out. So I was already really on that, like, online shopping and Amazon Prime and everything. Like, I was already there, but now it's even like more.
Yeah.
And so now even like the designers and some of the resources that we're using within our business, and I know it's not consumer, but we're picking people from all over the world now, which is like super cool. So we can find the best people no matter where they are. Whereas I think before it would have been more of a local bias to say who's nearby and who can I like go meet up with. And now we can find really good designers that are elsewhere. So yeah, it's changed a lot of that sort of stuff. And then we've been spending more time at the lake, and and more time with family, to be honest, which has been really nice.
Absolutely. That's really awesome. Is there anything that you've read that's really inspired you?
Yeah, I think, so I mentioned the book Messy Middle. I think I've like taken photos of multiple pages in that book and sent them around, because I think, and that whole book is kind of around, it's not about starts and finishes. It's about the stuff in the middle in an entrepreneurial venture. And it's a very easy read, but there's just some really good nuggets about like, here's things to keep in mind as you're building your business. So that one's been really good. Another one that I'll kind of mention, which is a little bit probably different from what most people in Calgary would read. It's called Alchemy, and it's from one of the founders of Ogilvy Advertising. And it's really interesting because what he talks about is kind of this bias at a lot of corporations. And I think especially in Calgary, we have that because of the engineering influence and a bunch of the oil and gas and technical fields. And it talks about how sometimes you can't create and force create through logic and rational and data magic. And sometimes magic happens and creativity happens and connection happens, and it doesn't happen through surveys and quantitative analysis and processes and all that. And I even see that, I see that with Calgary. It's like, oh, well, we're going to teach everyone and train everyone on design thinking, and then we'll all be innovative. And it's like, no, like that's not really the secret sauce. Like, it's good to have that as a tool, but you know, that's not actually going to change the economy. That's not going to do it. And so it's a bit more around how do you kind of pull the logic out and get more into that irrational, human, magic, qualitative area of business, and that it all doesn't have to be this rational thing that's all backed up with business cases and everything. And so I think that one's a really good one. We've been making a lot of our clients read that one, just to kind of give them a little bit of a push to say, you know, even if you've got the best business case in the world, this might work, or we don't really know how successful it's going to be, and there's only so much you can guess. But that'd be one I'd really recommend, especially if people are coming from more of a technical background, is trying to train themselves out of that a little bit.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I only have a few more questions, a couple more questions here for you, Alex. I always love asking this one, but what's something that you never get asked that you wish you would be asked?
That's a tough one. One of the things I think that people sometimes don't ask enough is like, what are you actually kind of passionate about? I think that people just jump into business, and they jump into, like, no one really tries to understand people's whys. Why are they doing the things that they're doing? And I think you learn a lot about people when you understand their why they exist, what they're trying to build, why they're trying to build those things. And I think people should ask that more of each other. And it's not something I often get asked. Like, it's a lot about the what I'm doing, as opposed to the why. And I think the why just provides a lot more context for people's decisions.
Absolutely. Which segues perfectly to my next question. Why are you doing what you're doing, Alex?
Yeah. No, it's like, I think I'd love to say, like, you know, I hate consulting and I'm trying to break this industry, and like whatever like any startup person says about their industry, like, you know, they all have some sort of story thing. But like, I think honestly for me, I've just learned, I've gone through a lot of different roles, and there's a lot of self-awareness, I think, that comes about learning what environment you succeed best in and what type of work you love to do. And my why, like, I've always been kind of a troublemaker, I think, like my entire life. And some environments encourage that and some environments really don't. And so my why is that, like, I just really want to be that troublemaker, like, and be paid for that. Like, I want that to be my day, is to be pushing things and to be asking those tough questions. But I think also, you know, it's how do you actually kind of create a little bit more fire within the Canadian economy is something that I'm really passionate about. And I was lucky early in my career, I got to spend a lot of time with global companies, and I always saw this like risk appetite that existed everywhere but in Canada. And there's just such a risk aversion here, and there's such a fear, and there's such a lack of speed. And so if I can influence that in any way by kind of being that troublemaker, by pushing buttons, by suggesting good things, by finding those little opportunities that you can't say no to as a corporation, and that pushes people to create new business models, that pushes more creation in the economy, more jobs, more startups, because those people that learn that in a corporation then go do their own thing. That's really what I'd love to do. Like, that's why I do it, because I think we need more people that think.
I love that. I love your passion too. I'm sure the listeners do too. Speaking of which, where can they connect with you online if you have more questions and want to pick your brain more?
Yeah, for sure. LinkedIn's good.
Okay.
I'm usually pretty good about responding on LinkedIn. Or you can just email me. It's alexnuth@gmail.com is my personal one, or alex@nowornever.network. And so either one works, but yeah, just online is the best way.
Cool. I'll add those links to the podcast description so you guys reach out. But yeah, really, it was a pleasure talking to you, Alex, and I'm sure the listeners loved you as well. I like to end the podcast with the guest saying a question, quote, or a story to end the interview. So my last question to you, Alex, is: do you have a question, quote, or a story to end the interview?
I think I'm just going to steal the quote that I dropped earlier, which is the two most addictive things in the world are heroin and a biweekly paycheck. So just ask yourself if you're addicted.